This is the IDP After Show.
Let's go ahead and start off with the defensive line. Now, the Bills' defensive line, I would say, has struggled for a little bit, but last season, before Von Miller got injured, they were looking really, really good. So, obviously, up at the top, we've got Greg Rousseau, but they have a couple other excitable, noting names. Who would you call out as far as some notable guys on this Buffalo Bills defensive line?
Yeah, it's really interesting when it comes to the Buffalo Bills. I guess I'll say play calling philosophy with the defensive line. Sean McDermott, has always rotated defensive line. So the tough part from an IDP standpoint is they just don't get a lot of pass rush snaps because you've got Von Miller, you've got Gregory Rousseau, you've got Boogie Basham, you got AJ Epinesa, you got Shaq Lawson. All these guys are getting some sort of playing time. Now you've also got the Bills signing Leonard Floyd to essentially a one-year prove-it deal. So now he's getting added to the mix. And then on the interior defensive line side, you've got Ed Oliver, who they signed to a contract extension, which I think some were surprised, including me, that they went ahead and did that. He's been, I'd say, good, not great, more so disappointing for where he was drafted and his counterparts in the division, even with Quinnen Williams and Christian Wilkins. They have definitely outplayed him so far. But he's only 25 years old, and then we brought in Poona Ford. I don't know how IDP relevant he is, depending on your roster, your starters for IDP. But he's a run mauler, which the Bills have been needing pretty badly. They also have got Daquan Jones and Tim Settle on the interior defensive line.
Yeah, man, it's a very deep group. I'm looking at this best ball average draft position here, and there are 10 defensive linemen that have been drafted in these drafts so far. Greg Rousseau at the top, Ed Oliver and Von Miller basically back to back, then Leonard Floyd. Then there's a massive gap. And then it's, Shaq Lawson, AJ Epinesa, Boogie Basham. Are there any names there as far as like what order they're going that you're like, man, this is a big red flag? Or is that pretty much what you'd expect to see?
Well, I think when you watched Von Miller play last year, I mean, you could just tell just the burst that he had right when the ball was snapped. Now, with him recovering from an ACL, they say he's going to be ready for week one. I'm not positive that he will be ready for week one. And honestly, with bringing in Leonard Floyd, I actually think that they can be a little more cautious with bringing back Von Miller because we really need him for the playoffs. He's the closer, right? So I actually would say, as far as ADP goes, I actually think I like Leonard Floyd quite a bit. I think that he could actually do very well in this defensive line. And I also like Greg Rousseau as well. He had only played 13 games last year. He had an injury that he dealt with. And I know Rousseau has even, I think, come out publicly and said that his plan is to, get at least over 10 sacks. I think he does. He had 8 sacks last year, so he was on pace to do it. So I think this could be the year that he could really break out. What will be interesting is what I think will happen is because of Greg Rousseau's frame and his pass rush ability, I could really see once Von is healthy, you could have Von and Leonard Floyd on the outside and then have Ed Oliver on the inside and then Greg Rousseau rushing the passer on the inside just because he's such a big, tall guy. And I think that's a pretty formidable front. So I'm excited to see how that's going to shape.
Man, you got me really excited about this upcoming season. That'll be really cool to see. 10 sacks coming from Greg Rousseau. You heard it here first. I like that as a goal for him. I wish every IDP player would just come out and tell us what their projection should be. I think that would make our job a lot easier.
Yeah.
And he's going really, really high. He's the second highest drafted IDP on the entire Bills roster. The only person going ahead of him is their linebacker, Matt Milano. So let's go ahead and chat about their linebacker position. I think you and I can both agree Matt Milano is a set it and forget it guy. But behind him, that's where things get interesting. I've seen a lot of different reports for camp, but I'm just curious what your opinion is. Predictions aside, I know it's going to be pretty difficult to tell who gets it and be absolutely correct. But I'm just kind of curious what your thoughts are on the number 2 linebacker spot here.
Yeah, it's really interesting because the Bills defense, they run nickel primarily most of the time. So you're not talking about 3 linebacker sets. You're talking about just the 2. And with Tremaine Edmonds leaving in free agency, you're talking about a vacated 104th tackle. So, like you said, who's going to step up? I think it might be a committee approach. They got A.J. Klein, the veteran, who was back in Carolina back in the days when Sean McDermott was a defensive coordinator. So he knows the system. They drafted Dorian Williams. But based on my different draft analysts that have talked about him, I think he's got the potential, but maybe he's more kind of an outside. He wouldn't be like an outside linebacker, pass rusher. But they wonder if he really would be that true inside linebacker that Tremaine Edmonds was. So it'll be kind of interesting to see who fills that spot. But right now, my gut tells me it's probably going to be a committee approach.
I hate that you said that. You're probably right. I don't like it. I don't want it to be true. I just want one guy to soak up all the snaps. But yeah, I think it's really important to bring that up. I don't think when I talk about this team and when I hear other people talk about this team that is being listed as a possible range of outcomes enough. And I think it's important that we touch on that. Just according to ADP, at least, the market seems to think it's Dorian Williams and then Terrell Bernard and then Tyrell Dodson and then like way later AJ Klein and then way later Balin Spector. I don't really think those guys have a chance at really having that upside, but it is interesting because the battle does seem to be mostly between Dorian Williams and Terrell Bernard. And I told you there's a little bit of lore here. I had a super unhealthily high, I think that's the word, we're going to roll with it, but a really high exposure to Terrell Bernard before the draft. And obviously my heart has broken since then. So anytime Terrell Bernard gets mentioned, pour one out for me. But I do think it's interesting, right? There's a chance at a committee here. And if that's the case, then perhaps maybe we both lose no matter who you picked. So it'll probably be a really volatile situation. Let's go ahead and look at defensive back before we close out the Buffalo Bills. Now, I find the ADP really interesting because at least in my opinion, a lot of backups are being drafted, like a lot of guys that are just not going to see the field unless an injury happens. So just to clue you in kind of what I'm seeing here, because I know I'm staring at the spreadsheet here, but like we've got Jordan Poyer going as DB 21. That makes sense. Teron Johnson, their nickel, going as DB 64. Okay. Micah Hyde going as DB 76. All right, I see it. But then DeMar Hamlin and Taylor Rapp, Kaiir Elam's maybe, Tre'Davious White makes sense. But like there's Dane Jackson. There's a lot of guys here who I feel like are being drafted that are probably putting up zeros every week without an injury. Am I wrong about that? What do you think about their defensive back situation?
Yeah, I mean I'm not going to get on a rabbit trail here, but I think a lot of it does kind of matter as to what is your IDP settings. A lot of times cornerbacks are the forgotten man, especially sometimes if it's just a defensive back role, you don't really even need to think about a corner. So I think that depending on who's listening, that's going to matter quite greatly. I think Poyer, he was banged up even as early as training camp. He had a huge, cast on his elbow. He just was battling injuries left and right. Micah Hyde, had that season-ending neck injury. Sounds like from all indication, he'll be back. So I think when it comes down to it, I think Poyer, so long as he's healthy, he has been unbelievable in Buffalo. I think that's actually kind of, I wish I could see the ADP list, but that number seemed kind of low, to be honest with you, as far as this season. I do really like Taylor Rapp, though. Poyer and Hyde are both 32 years old. So they've, who do they have in the pipeline? You've got DeMar Hamlin, but Rapp was a starter for the Rams. I think he could be interesting. As far as the corners go, Trey White came back from the ACL last year. Just didn't look like himself. He's only 28 years old. I have hopes that he will kind of right the ship this season. And then Kaiir Elam, we had a lot of hope for him being drafted in the first round, but Christian Benford really kind of overtook him. And you mentioned Dane Jackson as well. I've heard mixed reports as far as how Elam's progressing. I hope that he continues to progress, and he has had some flash plays. But we'll have to see. I have hope for him.
Yeah, man, the Bills have definitely needed a solid outside corner too for a while now. So hopefully one of those guys can step up and really solidify themselves as a part of that defense. I told you there's a lot of lore with this team. I guess for whatever reason, the Bills are just a team that I love getting high exposure to. So the number one player I have exposure to in all of best ball is Micah Hyde. I've probably done like 32 drafts at this point, and I've probably drafted him in like 30 of them. So tell me I'm not healthy, but also, is there a chance that I'm completely wrong and Micah Hyde just bites me in the butt, or is he a good guy to kind of put my chips in on? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting because Micah Hyde kind of relies a lot on the interceptions, pass breakups type of player. He's not your box safety that's going to get you a lot of tackles. And him coming off a season-long injury, I think you probably are getting him at the value dip, and that's probably why I would imagine you're probably really interested in him. I like him a lot. I wonder how much. It's hard to really know how he's really fully recovered from the injury and will he be truly himself again. I think he will. It is interesting. They did bring in Taylor Rapp, who turned down money elsewhere to come to Buffalo. So that is, if we're reading between the lines, that would be sort of interesting. But I think you'll be safe, and I think it'll be a good value for you.
You're too kind, man. I feel like that was the nicest way of saying, man, I don't know. That sounds a little risky to me.
This was the IDP After Show.